Hi, everyone. Welcome. I am Cheryl Piper, and this is Live with CherylPiper.com. And today is Wednesday, so it is interview day. And if you know anyone that's having struggles with addiction, please share this link out to them. They're going to want to see this broadcast because I have a very special guest. I'll be bringing him on in just a minute. He's actually waiting in the lobby. So just wanted to give you a chance to share this out with anyone that you know in this space of having struggle with addiction. You know, addiction, it's such a big subject now and touching so many lives. And so I'm so grateful to bring Dean on to talk about this. I also want to let you know to please watch this broadcast on my business page, which is, you can reach it at Cheryl Piper Sends Love. I've pushed this out a lot of different areas to promote it. And I want you to be able to be part of the show today if you're watching live. So I want you to be able to comment, and we'll see your comments. And I can only see that if you're watching from the original post, which is on my business page at Cheryl Piper Sends Love. And we love your comments, so please feel free to put those comments in, whether you're watching live or you're catching the rebroadcast. I'm going to, I always answer the comments. I want you guys to get your questions answered, and we just love it when you're part of the show. So I am going to introduce our guest today. Our guest is Dean Taraborelli, and he is the founder, administrator, and counselor at the Sanctuary at Sedona. And Dean is a pioneer in the field of addiction recovery. He has studied in areas of addiction and really has a lot of things available on his website as far as all of those different areas that he has studied and bringing that expertise to addiction recovery. He's implemented this program, and it's called Integrative Addiction Recovery, and we'll be chatting about that today. Dean, he's just traveled all over the place. He's been in like 60 countries, really studying all of the wisdom throughout the area and bringing it back to the sanctuary at Sedona. So I would like to bring him up from the lobby and introduce to you Dean Taraborelli. Hi, Dean.
Hi, Cheryl.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing really great, and I'm deeply honored to be here with you today. So you're all the way across the country, and you look like you're right in the same room. So thanks for having me.
Isn't this fun? It's like we're just right in the next room chatting. It's great. I love I love technology, and
I know you do, and I'm a little on the fence about that. I'll let you know how I'm doing with it all. But anyway, thanks so much.
Welcome, Dean. And I want to bring your website up so people can check that out as we're talking. They can actually go there and look as we're going through the broadcast. So, Dean, what I'd like to do with starting out today is, just have you talk a little bit about your story and, what kind of the history, the background, and what has brought you into this passion that you have for what you're doing now. That would be great.
Yeah. Okay, Cheryl. Thanks. I think, first of all, addiction touches so many people. The statistics for addiction, 1 out of 10 people suffer from addiction. So every family is touched in some way. If we look at what addiction really is, it's far more pervasive than that. So now we have a million ways that people cannot be present. So we're used to hearing about street drugs, and we can't forget about prescription drugs. Hey, a lot of people get on things and they can't get off of them. That means they're addicted to them. Whether your doctor gave it to you or whether your drug dealer gave it to you or whether you bought it at the liquor store, if you can't stop doing it, then you're addicted to it. And then we can throw in some processes like phones and computers and pornography and all the other things that can take people out of their life purpose and their meaning. Those are addictions. So for me, I think, to sum up a really long 30-year story, I started using marijuana when I was 12 years old, and I have zero memory before that. So, as far as I'm concerned, I was born at age 12 with a joint in my hand. That progressed to heavy alcohol use. That progressed to painkillers, which progressed to heroin, which progressed to cocaine. At kind of at the zenith of my addiction, I had a $200,000 a year habit. That was many years, not just 1 year. And during that time, I was trying to get well. I went to my first treatment center when I was in my late 20s, and I worked really hard in them, and I paid attention. I wanted to get well. I couldn't understand why I was doing these destructive things, because I had a really kind of vanilla life. My parents cared about me. I had a brother. We got along. I was successful. I did okay in school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet I took enough drugs to, kill an elephant. And so that was really confusing for me. And all of the drama that happened along with that. So I think that the most important thing for the viewers, I think, today to understand is, I've been to every kind of treatment. I've been hospitalized for overdose probably 25 times. I've been clinically dead twice. I've been, you name it. I've had more drama, and none of that could stop me. And what was interesting, I went to treatment with thousands of people, and I watched them all very carefully. I spent 20 years in treatment in one way or another. And I noticed that I wasn't the only one that wasn't getting it. Nobody was really getting well. A very select population were actually being successful in living the kind of lives that they wanted to live. So as I saw that, I then branched out into other parts of the world. If I heard about a doctor in another country, or a shaman, or a cleric, or a teacher, or some kind of coach, or some process that they were doing in the other side of the world, I'd go there because I wanted to get well. And that's when one day I was in a treatment experience, and I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I know more about this than virtually anybody I've ever sat across the table from. And I had a vision for a different kind of a treatment, and that's what became the sanctuary. So that's a little bit about the story of how we got here, and all of the different components. It's so interesting in the Western medicine component right now. We use a lot of medication. So you go to treatment, you get medicated because, hey, you've got a chemical imbalance. And I'm going to tell you, there's not one peer-reviewed shred of evidence that substantiates chemical imbalance as the cause of addiction, depression, or anxiety. Mm-hmm. But hey, medication has become the leading treatment protocol. And while, hey, medication can be great as an intervention, it's now become a lifestyle. So, and the problem with medication is it's treating the symptom. It's a Band-Aid on top of what's really going on the root.
Exactly. And that's and as you speak of that, I see, like, on your website, it talks about how, what you do at the sanctuary at Sedona is to get down to heal the root cause. So could you maybe talk a little bit about that and what you see with moving forward in that type of a thought process with the people who come to the sanctuary?
Yeah, thank you. Addiction right now is classified by the American Society of Addiction Medicine as a brain reward malfunction, meaning I just cannot get enough. I'm not making dopamine on my own, so I got to augment that some way, and I'm never going to get enough. So that's a brain disease. And they may lead you to believe that is unto itself, kind of like type 1 diabetes. You either have it or you don't. And if you do, then, hey, you have to deal with it. And if you don't, you don't. And it just kind of comes. We're going to let you know that there is always a cause, because the body has its own innate healing ability, its own ability to be in balance. And so what we found is the cause is either going to be physical or some kind of a psychological issue. And if it's physical, we look at now, we're very connected to some of the leading thinkers in around food and nutrition. And so what they're finding now is, hey, the things like anxiety and depression, which go hand in hand with addiction, these things, we used to think they were like comorbidities with inflammation. So we've all heard about inflammation. It's the buzzword now out in the world. And so, hey, I've got depression and I've got some inflammation too. Well, actually what they're finding out is that inflammation is the cause of anxiety, depression, not coexisting with. So this condition of the body, if my body's out of balance, it can throw me out of balance and promote my addiction. So that's one potential root cause, is the physical. Then we go to the psychological. And here's where it gets a little bit nebulous, because what we do, as I shared earlier in the show, I never thought that I had much trauma. You know, my parents were kind. They never locked me in the basement. They didn't beat my butt. They didn't do all the things that I heard hundreds of times in hundreds of process groups in treatment. And I thought, wow, these guys had it so much worse than me. I don't have any reason. And what we're finding out is that what happens with people is they hide their wounds. And what I mean by that is I'm going to protect it so I don't have it inflamed. Kind of like if I were to hurt my body right now, if I was walking and twisted my ankle, my body would compensate to protect, to keep weight off of that other ankle so it can heal. Well, we do the same with our psychological wounding. Something will happen, and if I go into fight or flight and stay there longer than what is ordinary for our species, I will begin to develop beliefs and responses and all. The brain is very well organized. So when I have a negative experience and I develop a response, that gets filed back here in my limbic brain, and the thing is that response now will be my conditioned response, and I'll do the same response 20 years from now. So we keep reliving the past, we keep recreating our traumas. And so for us at the sanctuary, we're not really focused on what happened to get you in the door, because most of the time that's version number 200 of the original core wound that people have. So it's not the last time we got hurt, it's the first time, because that's when I developed all of my strategies and beliefs and coping mechanisms to deal with that. And I carry them with me my whole life, and they're invisible. So interesting. We look at the way the brain is programmed, and a way that I might be able to help people understand, because it's so, I feel like I have command of my brain. I know what I'm thinking. Well, that's only 5% of what's going on in your brain right now. 95% is not within your consciousness. So how many times have we heard people say, you know what, I will never grow up to be like my mother or father? We've heard that a lot. And what happens to those 95% of the time? They grow up to be exactly like their mother and father. And we wonder, well, why? That's the antithesis of what I'm looking for. And it's because we're programmed that way. My brain sees it, it learns it, it becomes my beliefs and my coping strategies, and that's then my operating system for my life, like it or not. And this is just how the brain works. So what we did is we figured, hey, rather than treat this addiction piece as some kind of a disease, what is triggering it? Just like if we look at other issues, depression and anxiety, yes, they are diagnosable mental illness, but they are also symptoms of something else. So why am I depressed? Why am I anxious? And I can tell you, antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicine do nothing to get to the cause. So what's interesting is, let's say I have an anxiety issue. I take anti-anxiety medication, so I'm stable, I'm able to function, but I'm still going to avoid that which makes me anxious. So my world gets smaller and smaller. And what's interesting is that people that are addicted typically are kind of these type A people that are looking to have their lives be bigger. And so that's why oftentimes people suffer in recovery, because it's so limiting and small. And so we wanted to help people no longer be defined by an addiction. So for me, I shared a little bit about how I got here.
Yes.
90% of my life, for 30 years of my life, 90% of my life, my time was either devoted to finding some kind of a substance or trying not to use it. It took up that much space in my mind. You know, am I going to die? Am I going to this? Is that going to happen? Am I going to get arrested? All the things that go on. And I can tell you, Cheryl, right now, it does not even cross my mind. I don't wake up ever and say, oh my God, I hope I don't get high today or any of that. And so therefore, I am free of my addiction, and we use the term recovered. So be recovered, not in recovery.
Yes, and I did see that on your website, and I did want to ask that as a question, because I'm sure that there are people out there in the audience wondering, what does that mean? Because, you know, I thought that you would always be in recovery is kind of the norm, and so I wanted to bring that point up. So thank you. If you could discuss that maybe a little.
Yeah. So we have this concept that addiction is this lifelong incurable disease because it's classified as such. And so I looked into this a little bit, and I looked up all the other lifelong incurable diseases that used to be front and center in our culture that aren't anymore. They're not even an issue. And I can't list them off the top of my head now. In a presentation, I have maybe 15 of them. And these are diseases that just aren't prominent. And I thought, well, why can addiction not fall into that category? So I thought about it, and I remember one day I was sitting in an AA meeting, and I heard somebody share, and this person was 30 years sober, and they were still blaming their life circumstance on their alcohol addiction. And I thought, wow, when does a person get to be just a normal guy having stress like every other normal guy? You know, we all have visa bills and girlfriends and families and kids and, you know, all kinds of things. And this led me to this quest of, wow, how can we in fact get better? And in the process of actually dealing with our underlying stuff, I found that it no longer becomes the definer. So we can resolve the past. And when we resolve the past, then we don't need to keep recreating the past. So, you know, for me, I shared a little bit earlier, you know, my life is defined by who I'm becoming, not who I've been. So it's a little bit of a controversial position to say, hey, you can be recovered. And a lot of times when I share that, people will say to me, okay, does that mean I can get high again? And, you know, and the people that ask me that question, most are counselors. But what's interesting is, you know, if we look at not being present in my life and ingesting a solvent is my zenith of getting well, then that person probably needs a little bit more recovery, because I believe that being recovered means now I'm free to explore all these other possibilities. I have no fear about persons, places, or things, triggers, all of those issues that are really common in early recovery to be concerned about. And hey, we need to, you know, whatever we need to do to stop using, let's do it. And so being recovered to us just means that, hey, I'm no longer defined by this problem, and therefore it takes up less space in my life, and eventually forget all about it.
Yes, and that makes, I understand exactly where you're coming from and going with that statement, Dean, because it's looking forward and then not concentrating so much in looking back. It's where am I going to, and being free from that thought always entering the mind. You're moving into what's coming next for you, and that's your thought, that's your excitement. And if you, this is, please correct me if I'm wrong, but this is kind of what I'm hearing, that when we move into that space of getting to that core issue that created the challenge, then we are free from that, because we have released what was the core issue. And now we can move forward with excitement in learning what's next and exploring those ideas versus feeling trapped in something.
Exactly right. I mean, exactly right. If we go right now, if you look at the DSM, half of the United States population can be classified with some kind of mental diagnoses. And so what we've done is we have pathologized normal life things, grief and sadness and loss and despair. These have now become diagnosable issues rather than milestones that we all need to go through and move past and learn from and grow through as people on this planet. So I think that what's interesting is what's driving our behavior is our beliefs. And so people think they understand what their beliefs are because, hey, I'm conscious, I know what I like, I know what I don't like, I know that the sky is blue, etc. What's interesting is that our beliefs are invisible to us, and so we don't think about them that much. But when I have a belief that I've adopted under duress, that becomes the same prominence of belief as every other belief that I have. So if we look at when we get our beliefs, we typically get them when we're young. And if we look, for example, at a person who might be born into a household that's prejudiced, this person will have a belief about people of a different color before they've ever had an experience with them or seen one. And of course, when they finally have an experience with this person, it's going to probably not go well because they already have a preconceived notion of how it's going to go. So our underlying beliefs wind up being the drivers of our life because they affect our perception. Mm-hmm. And this is a scientific fact, and perception is reality. So that means that whatever you're perceiving is what's going on for you. And a person sitting right next to you can have a completely different perception of the same circumstance. So their experience of this is different, and then their resulting behavior is going to be different. So yes. when we get to the root of what's driving us, and there's a ton of science now that supports all these things that we're talking about, we resolve it, then we're available to actually be more of our authentic self.
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a good point, Dean. And just, I mean, in relation to when you're talking about perception, just in one of the courses that I teach on conversation, as far as communicating and having conversation with other people where you are actually creating that communication, perception is huge in that because we view things through our window of perception. So I appreciate you bringing that up. Now, I do have a question here from Jeff, and because I do want to get into the science of it after this, but I wanted to bring Jeff's question up on the screen. And Jeff's question is, I'm not sure if you can see this on your end, Dean. It says, very dangerous to tell an addict you're cured. And that's not really what you're saying. And I didn't hear you use the word cured, but perhaps, I'm just reading the question as Jeff saying it. What do you think what do you think is going to be the first thing that they try? And so I wanted to bring that up on the screen. So, because, I want people to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, it's a great question. And Jeff, it's a really good question. And this is why we go through a process. So our work here is a whole process, and we are spending time digging into the root. And when we look at people that had stage 4 cancer. So there's somebody that, and I'll just use cancer as an example. Somebody looked and studied 250 people that had a complete remission from stage 4 cancer, and what are the things that they did? And so they came up with a whole plethora of things that all of these people did, but they narrowed it down to a handful of things that they all did. And taking control of your health, taking control of your diet, having a spiritual connection, resolving your unresolved conflicts. These were all parts and parcel to what these people did to fully recover from cancer. Mm-hmm. So when we begin to do that, we begin to help people to get to what's really making them tick. And then all of a sudden, it's not about the drug anymore. And I want to be clear about our position. We are an abstinent-based program. And what we share with people is, look, if we look at the process of epigenetics and neuroplasticity, which give evidence that the brain can in fact change, and we we measure brain changes through brain mapping while people are here, what happens is that we grow new neural pathways, our genes can begin to express differently, but this takes time. And so we let people know, by the way, you're in a process that's going to take some time. Healing takes time, just as if I had some disease or I had a heart bypass, it takes me time to recover. The same for an addict. And so we don't tell people, you're cured, go do whatever you want. That's not responsible. What we do is help empower people to understand that they have more control over what's going on in their brain and their bodies than we've ever thought possible in the past.
Thank you so much, Dean. Thank you so much. Now, I did hear you mention the brain mapping and the neuroplasticity and epigenetics, which that's kind of one of the things I wanted to talk about as well is how science-based you are and what you're doing in that area, working with science.
Yeah, that's a good question. In the process of my experience in addiction and looking at this every way under the sun, I kind of Googled this thing about, remission and success rates. And interestingly enough, if we look at success rates of AA, which is the most popular peer support system on the planet, and it does really great work. So we look at AA as a model because it's available. Then we look at drug treatment, which has become a pretty big business in the United States. We look at the statistics. The statistics are very similar. It's less than 10% of people are successful in both of those things. Then we looked at something called spontaneous remission. And that means that people do nothing and get better. And it's about the same statistic. So we thought, well, wow, people are getting better. That's where they just decide not to drink anymore, not to do drugs, and they don't anymore. And it just goes away. What we decided was, okay, and rather than wait for a spontaneous remission, how can we, in fact, help our bodies to go into remission? And we looked and came up with this totally integrated process that we go through. Because, again, a lot of people have heard about serotonin, all the antidepressants in the 80s when they first came out, Prozac and Paxil, they were all serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And that's assuming, hey, I've got not enough serotonin in my brain. Well, the interesting thing is that your serotonin is manufactured in your gut, and it's regulated in the brain by the pineal gland, which methylates melatonin and serotonin, but it's manufactured in your gut. So if we don't include the gut in our recovery program, we're missing a giant piece. If we don't address the unconscious mind in our recovery program, we're missing a giant piece. If we don't include the soul, and I've been to so many 12-step meetings where you hear people talking about the whole and the soul that I just can't fill no matter what. I can't shove enough in there, and there's not enough money in the world to fill the hole in the soul. And the soul, it's its own discrete aspect of a human being. So it has certain ways that we interact with the soul, and the same with our nervous system and energy system. So what we've found is that if a program is not holistic or integrated, it's probably not going to be as effective, or it's definitely not going to be as effective, and it probably will not work, hence the statistics that are out there. So what we wanted to do is say, hey, we've got this program. How do we know that it works? Right? So we looked, and we're based on science. Every process that we have has a scientific foundation. If you go and Google simple things like meditation, there is a zillion peer-reviewed papers about how effective it is in reorganizing the brain, helping people to be less anxious and less depressed. These are facts. And we looked at all the other components, and they all have very valuable statistics, not applicable specifically to addiction. So if we look at epigenetics, for example, this is a wide body of information that what happens is how I think and feel affects whether my genes upregulate and downregulate. So naturally at the sanctuary, we're a small facility. We don't have a research center to study people's genome. But what we do is it's like, wow, there's enough people out there doing it. So we take that model And we say, okay, now we're using it over here. So what is similar to what's happening there to what's happening here? And then I can take some basic assumptions from over there and apply them over here. So a simple analogy for that is, hey, if I'm used to driving a car and now I buy an SUV, it's not like I have to reinvent the wheel. I know what the basic components are, but hey, this thing goes off-road and this one stays on road. This one has four-wheel drive. This has two-wheel drive. So we thought, how do we measure this whole thing? So we went out and investigated and came up with this process called brain mapping, where we do a 19-point brain scan to see how the brain is communicating with itself. How coherent is it? How organized is it? And these are not mood specific. This is, you can be in a bad mood or a great mood. Your brain scan is going to be the same. And we take a picture in the beginning of treatment and we take a picture at the end of treatment. And we find that people, by and large, have substantial brain changes after a month in this process. And I don't know anybody else that's doing that in the recovery community. Most of the time when we talk about statistics, you ask people, there's a survey when people leave and then they call them up, X amount of time later and find out how they're doing. And that is just the best that we have right now. That's not ultra reliable, but it's the best that we have. So what we thought is, we want to know what happens here in 30 days. And when you look at the data, data doesn't lie. So
that's true. That's true. And that's very good. So what you're saying is, when people come to your facility, you're doing a brain mapping as they come in, and then go through your program and doing a brain mapping before they leave, and you're able to see measurable what's going on, what happened there.
Yeah, and it's right there in front of people. And it does a couple of things. It helps us to know that we're on the right track and that our recovery program is actually helping people get traction. And it's also helping the clients understand, wait a second, something happened. So it makes it more real. It's another thing to help drive all this home and integrate it. And because, again, we look at the data, there it is. And so if a person comes in on their last day, they're a little nervous about leaving, or they're feeling defeated in some way, and we say, well, here's what happened. And by and large, this really gets people excited and helps them to own their process and their progress.
Very good. Very good. So if you had maybe like a tip or a tool or something that you could share with the audience on something that you wish that you would have known earlier, that you know now, to maybe help them move in that direction, what may that be?
Well, something that I would share is there's a word that I came across, and the word is iatrogenesis. And what iatrogenesis means is death by medicine. And that is, hey, a person has problem A and they die of complication B. Let's look at staph infection. A person goes to the hospital to have their appendix removed. They get a certain strain of staph that's impervious to antibiotics. They die. That's an iatrogenic response. Iatrogenesis is the third leading cause of death in the United States. Wow. So heart disease, cancer, and medicine. So medicine is the third leading cause of death. So that tells me that I can't walk into my doctor's office and just say, hey, here I am. Tell me what to do. I'm all yours. Now we have the internet and we can Google. And what I would say above everything is that it's each person's responsibility to take command of their own health. Because in the United States, we have great trauma medicine. If we get injured here, it's beyond any other country on the planet to get whole again. But if you're not feeling well, the United States ranks I think we're 40th in the world for developed nations in terms of healthcare. We're not a well society. So I can't depend on whatever's doctoring this unwell society to take care of me. So I must take charge of my own health. And that's what I would tell people to research. And don't just take the first thing that comes your way, because there's a lot out there that'll really blow your mind when it comes to mental health and addiction and what's going on. And we can look at the simple thing of food. So most of the food that people are eating are more toxic than the chemicals that they're using to get high with. And those things take their toll on their body, their brain. Most people have brain damage from the food that they're eating. And so, again, if I have damage to the brain, particularly my hippocampus, I'm not going to be able to get well or feel well, and my chances of staying clean are substantially reduced.
Well, that's a good point, Dean. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, just really taking that into our own hands as far as doing that research, doing our homework to know what is the best path for us to move forward, rather than simply taking, having someone else tell us is what.
Yeah, recovery is not one size fits all. Hey, we've got 12-step. That's a great model and works for a lot of people. Doesn't work for everybody. We've got smart recovery. That's another process. Works for some people. Doesn't work for all people. We have a myriad of ways to get healthy. And it's not one thing for everyone, because we're as individual as there people on the planet. That's how many different recovery programs there could be.
Well, thank you so much, Dean. So, I guess my next question is, because I know we're kind of coming up on our time here to wind down the program, but what are you doing next? I mean, what's coming up next for you? What's coming up next for the sanctuary? Do you have anything you want to share with us?
Well, we're looking at potentially opening up another center in Mexico, and there's a lot of study now with the use of medicinal plants. It's happening. There's an organization in the United States called MAPS that are using certain kinds of chemicals to help people get over PTSD and addiction. And so we're exploring that a little bit. And we're also looking to share our message. Myself and Kelly, we go out and speak at different places. So we're always happy to share this holistic model with anyone that's interested. And what's beautiful is that when we first began, Cheryl, 15 years ago, we were the only holistic treatment center on the block. There's nobody else doing this. And now it's becoming more common to hear the word holistic or integrated, and people are throwing in a little yoga or some meditation, which is great.
Right.
So we're moving in the right direction in terms of recovery. But for us, what we're looking to do is always stay on the cutting edge. How can we get better? How can we be offering every possible tool that exists to help our clients? Because the clients that come here, oftentimes they've been to every other treatment center on the planet. And so they're desperate and they're frustrated.
I see. I understand. Okay. So is there anything that you would like to share that maybe I haven't asked you about that you'd like to kind of end our chat with and share with the audience?
Well, I would like to share this, Cheryl. I'm deeply appreciative of what you're doing. And I'm appreciative of all the people out there that are taking risks to help create change in a pretty stuck industry. So if we look at big pharma, we look at medicine, medicine as we know it is coming to the end of its line. If we look at antidepressant or antibiotics, every time we come up with a new antibiotic, bacteria gets stronger. So who do you think is going to win? The microbe's been around for 4 billion years. We're just making antibiotics for 100 and something years. So I think those guys are going to ultimately win that battle. So it's people like you and us that are out there making these changes. And that, I think, is really exciting. And so that's what I would like to share as an acknowledgement of you. And thank you so much.
Oh, and thank you so much, Dean. I mean, that's what it's about. Really, I look at my only job is to help people to discover and release the things that are holding them back from living the life they want. I mean, that's what I do. And we just put it out there to the world, and we're making that change, one broadcast at a time, one conversation at a time. That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Dean. And everybody who's put comments in, great people who are watching this on the rebroadcast, add your comments, because Dean will pop back in here and check. I will definitely check. We'll both know when you've made a comment and be able to answer any questions you may have. Thank you so much, Dean. I'm going to take you down to the lobby and close the show up.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. What a wonderful, fantastic conversation this has been. I appreciate all of you being here. And I just want to share, again, if you're watching this live, if you're watching it on the rebroadcast, please add your comments in. We really want to communicate with you. Again, my guest today was Dean Taraborelli, and you can see scrolling across the bottom of the screen is Dean's website, sanctuary.net, if you'd like to find out more information on his program. I'd like to just ask anyone who is in the South Central Pennsylvania, Central Maryland, or the Eastern Panhandle of West Virginia, if you're interested in Tri-State Woman Retreats, it's starting next Thursday. It's April the 26th is the first retreat. It's going to be monthly, and we are bringing women together to connect and not compete. So grab your tickets. There's a few left. Thank you again for joining us today. I'm Cheryl Piper, and this is Live with CherylPiper.com. Take care.